Welcome to GESARA for Dummies. Let's look at today's news from Professor William Liebenberg, prepared by Martin Stein. Please like, share and subscribe. Join our Telegram group in the comments below. Thank you. Let's go. The GESARA Law. Q military intelligence said multiple times, it's going to be biblical. There is a creator and a destroyer. It is impossible for the destroyer to create something out of nothing. So, who then created your DNA? Correct, God. Now listen carefully, what the Q military intelligence says in post 4966. What is coded in your DNA? Who put it there? Why? Mankind is repressed. We will be repressed no more. Information is knowledge. Knowledge is power. Information is power. How do you protect your DNA? There is a war for your DNA. Protect your DNA. Ascension. With COVID, the Satanic Cabal attempted to destroy humanity's unique DNA, for every individual, by forcing their destructive vaccines, but Q military intelligence vehemently warns to protect your DNA, as it will be used as a unique key, to protect his monetary blessings to you. Thus, XRP is helping reshape identity online, using God-encrypted genomics, and privacy-first protocols on the XRP ledger, XRPL. DNA protocol is the next layer of secure verification, to protect you against the cabal, who is after your blessings. So let's explain the process of XRPL, that is powering the birth of blockchain biology, in simple terms. What you're about to read, will shatter your assumptions about what blockchains are for. This isn't payments. This isn't DeFi. This is genomic sovereignty, anchored on XRP ledger, an unhackable system. Genome, chain ledger drift, is what happens when you stress test a blockchain, with raw biological entropy. DNA protocol isn't storing data, no, it's anchoring live genomic computation, real-time entropy to consent transformations, and it's happening on XRPL. When anchor volume scales exponentially, most chains break or lag, but on XRPL, we see something different. Validator drift, a phenomenon where sync irregularities occur not as errors, but as cryptographic signatures of load balancing, self-healing. In other words, think immune response, but digital. These drift vectors aren't random. They're proofs of ZK consent computation, under extreme stress. Each curve, each deviation, represents a biological truth negotiation. Was consent given? Was entropy compressed fairly? Did the node resist falsification? That V0.12 curve break? Not volatility. Not failure. That's the protocol rejecting delay injection, a common attack vector. All this is XRP ledger, proving that sovereign genomic identity cannot be manipulated, or slowed under load. This is why XRPL was chosen. Speed? Excellent. Finality? Excellent. Immutability? Excellent. No gas fees? Excellent. Enterprise-grade ledger architecture? Excellent. DNA protocol is showing us XRPL isn't just a finance ledger, it's a consensus DNA vault, under extreme compression. What does this mean for the future? Genomic rights will be self-custodied. Biological truth will be time-stamped. ZK consent will become the new HIPAA. HIPAA stands for Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Passed in 1996, HIPAA is a federal law that sets a national standard to protect medical records and other personal health information. Governments will try to regulate it, but they won't be able to rewrite it. Because it's anchored on XRPL, totally decentralized. This is what it looks like when a blockchain becomes the backbone of human data itself. The rails are active. The entropy is flowing. The world will never be the same. This is not the Antichrist chip implant, as DNA cannot be implanted, it is God-given. The ledger will bend, but never break. XRPL is powering the birth of blockchain biology, banks in the economy. President Trump has said that he would soon nominate Jerome Powell's successor, with nearly a year left, before the Federal Reserve Chair's term ends. Trump has made no secret of his displeasure with Powell and the Fed for not lowering interest rates since the president began his second term in January. Trump has commented earlier this year that he could fire Powell, and a recent U.S. Supreme Court ruling eased worries that he could do so. He said earlier this month that a decision on the next Fed chair would be coming soon. How soon? Perhaps August 15th? President Trump says, Fed Chair Jerome Powell is a real dummy who's costing America billions. Powell should cut rates or quit. The mainstream media is beginning to acknowledge Judy Shelton as a potential candidate to lead the Federal Reserve. Principled and disciplined, Judy knows that gold holds the key to restoring trust in the U.S. monetary system and reviving the principle of sound money.
So talk to me about a return to a gold standard, because you made headlines when you came out years ago advocating for a return of a gold standard. How essential is it to return to some sort of gold standard to achieve a sound money process?
Well, thank you for asking that. It was interesting for me as a monetary scholar. I was a senior research fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. I had a postdoctoral fellowship, and I had studied a lot of monetary history. But when I was nominated to serve on the Federal Reserve Board, I had people saying, oh, she's a gold bug. That's the worst thing in the world. I think it's important to say, what can we learn from prior international monetary systems? I guarantee you, people such as Alan Greenspan and Paul Volcker, both of whom very good friends of mine, can easily talk about the relationship between gold and having reserves and the soundness of monetary systems. I remember one day there was a particularly vicious op-ed in the Washington Post about me, denigrating me as this gold bug, and I was putting out dog whistles to that crazy sound money community. And I sent an email to Alan Greenspan and said, I quoted the first line of his famous article on gold and economic freedom, which said, there seems to be a hysterical antagonism against the gold standard, which we can understand if we realize the welfare statists just want to transfer wealth and redistribute it as a socialist government would do. Very radical article he wrote back in the mid-60s as an acolyte of Ayn Rand. Well, he wrote back almost immediately, if gold is so worthless, why does the U.S. government and other major governments hold so much of it? So then I thought, these people who are just pundits really don't appreciate what the people who have been in the arena know about soundness. So what I'm proposing in the book is to set up a barometer so people can see, what if we really did have sound money? What would be the difference between, say, a Treasury instrument that paid off in gold at the option of the bondholder compared to a traditional Treasury certificate? And I think to maybe boil it down, you could say, what would you rather have today? $2,400 US or an ounce of gold? Mm-hmm. Let's say that's today's price. I think people might say, well, I'm indifferent because $2,400 equals an ounce of gold. Well, what about 50 years from now? Would you rather have $2,400 US or an ounce of gold? And I think most people would say, obviously, the gold, because they know the dollar deteriorates. So we start with that. Good as gold. We have had a classical international gold standard. We have had a managed gold anchored system under the Bretton Woods approach. So why can't we have money that's as good as gold?
She is known for her advocacy for a return to the gold standard, and for her criticisms of the Federal Reserve, which she has compared to the Soviet Union's economic planning.
What I'm suggesting is the U.S. Treasury could establish a Treasury instrument that is backed by gold, something I'm calling Treasury trust bonds. They could be as long as even 50-year bonds, as something that people could purchase that would give them the right at maturity to either take the face value of the bond in U.S. dollars or the amount of gold specified as part of the instrument. It would be very helpful for the Federal Reserve to see the difference in the rate of return required on that sort of instrument compared to the rate of return required on traditional Treasury securities. It could even become a price rule of sorts if it forced the members of the Federal Reserve Monetary Policy Making Committee to make judgments about the direction of interest rates based on taking that into account.
Trump already announced on July 2, 2019, that he would nominate Shelton to the Fed. It is very likely that she will be hired as the Fed chair, and then close it after the gold standard is restored.
As central banks have become more and more powerful, they've also become extremely prominent in financial markets, and I think that makes them inherently political because they're in a position to steer financial rewards to some members of society at the expense of others. The Fed has been complicit with a deficit spending Congress and White House. And I sometimes think if you ask someone, do you think the United States will still be here in 50 years? It's troubling that they almost have to think about it. And we hear so much about fiscal unsustainability. And if we're serious, what we mean is that's an existential threat. This is an important time for Congress to look at reforming the Fed. We should be every bit as concerned about power that has been placed in the hands of our monetary officials. The Fed is in a position to circumscribe the economic agenda of an incoming president. So the Fed is not the little guy if there's a battle of wills over how to achieve economic objectives. I'm uncomfortable that the Fed is in such a position to undermine the ability of an elected president to carry out his economic agenda. Congress needs to look at whether the Fed should be allowed to have no limits on the amount of government debt it can purchase, no limits on the amount of base money it can create with a keystroke, no limits on the amount of interest payments it can give to commercial banks and money market mutual funds at the expense of taxpayers. I might note, I think that the Fed has become too prominent, too powerful, and in that sense, too political.
Payment systems. Something interesting you should take notice of. From August 13 to 15, 1971, Nixon and 15 advisors, including Federal Reserve Chairman Arthur Burns, Treasury Secretary John Connally, and Undersecretary for International Monetary Affairs Paul Volcker, later Federal Reserve Chairman, met at the presidential retreat at Camp David, and created a new economic plan. On the evening of August 15, 1971, Nixon addressed the nation on a new economic policy.
The action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States. Now, what is this action, which is very technical, what does it mean for you? Let me raise.
The first order was for the gold window to be closed. Foreign governments could no longer exchange their dollars for gold. In effect, the international monetary system turned into a fiat one. Summary. August 15, 1971, is the day Nixon stopped the U.S. dollar being backed by gold, which brought an end to Bretton Woods. Why is the SEC versus Ripple case delayed to August 15 latest, but very possibly sooner? The SEC chair is a Trump appointee and Ripple Labs are Trump-friendly, and both requested the court to delay the appeals. Why delay, if they could immediately settle and get on with it? There is something secretly going on. What's very interesting is that Basel III will be in place on July 1, restoring gold as money. The SEC versus Ripple case is delayed to August 15 maximum, for unknown reasons. In my article, First Basel III, then Bretton Woods III, I explained Basel III must be restored first, which is now in place on July 1. On the heels of Basel III, the Bretton Woods Agreement III must follow. These two together opens the door for the gold standard. The closing of the U.S. gold window happened on August 15, 1971. Is August 15, the opening of the gold window, behind the scenes unknowingly to the masses? In another article called, Gold Payment Systems, and XRP, What You Should Know, I stated that XRP will be going gold-backed. The big question is, XRP lawsuit sees new twist, as Ripple and SEC request court to freeze appeal proceedings. Why? Suffice it to say, the SEC versus Ripple is a landmark lawsuit for crypto regulations in the US, and formally ending the litigation will be a symbolic victory for an industry that has already largely won its battle for legal legitimacy. August 15th latest may have the following in common. Ripple vs. SEC case close, XRP gold bridge. Bretton Woods agreement activated. New Fed chair nominate, gold standard process starts. All cryptocurrencies regulations already signed into law, as the House and Senate already took a recess by the 15th.
I know in one of my previous videos we talked about them pinning gold to Bitcoin, but what if that's the distraction? What if the real plan, the one they don't want us focused on, is XRP? Bitcoin's a great vault, sure, but it was never built for speed, scalability, or regulatory integration. Bitcoin is slow, it's volatile, and it's out of sync with the demand of real-time finance. You don't build a global monetary system on a digital rock. You build it on rails that move value instantly, that integrate with CBDCs, tokenized commodities, and central bank infrastructure. And that is XRP. Gold brings the trust. XRP, it brings the transmission. In a tokenized world, every asset needs a rail. And XRP is already plugged into the entire frickin' system. ISO 20022 compliant, deeply tied into cross-border payment pilots, and already tested with gold-backed assets. If you want to bridge the gap between old money and the new system, you'd pin gold to something programmable, something scalable, and built for compliance. XRP gives them the ability to tokenize and mobilize trust, to turn gold into a digital standard that actually moves and not just sits in a vault. Bitcoin may be the vault, but XRP is the highway. And in this reset, what we need isn't just a store of value. We need an instant universal value transferred back by real collateral. That's what XRP delivers. Gold-backed, blockchain audible, globally scalable. This isn't a meme coin narrative. It's the foundation for a programmable gold standard that actually works in the modern world. They don't need another asset just to hold. They need an engine that can run the entire system, and XRP was built just for that. Listen, go to chadsarton.com. Start downloading your guides and educating yourself. The system is coming in, whether you're educated or not. Book a call. If you need a consultation, you need to learn how this all operates, I've got you. chadsarton.com. Get over there today. Get scheduled. I'll see you on Zoom.
Show us some love by liking our videos, and leave us a short comment on your thoughts. Thank you.